Today I wanted to talk to you about my Clothkits trousers that were 40 years in the making. Hi, it's Claire and welcome to Needle Saying More. So I've had lots of customers and friends telling me about Clothkit garments they had that were their mums in the 70s, 80s. I've had customers saying about what great fabrics they were, how great the kits were. I was born just after this whole thing, so I missed it, but I'm really curious to find out more about Clothkits. So I went on to Vinted and I managed to get 4 Clothkits for £10. So I thought I'll buy them, try them out, and then see how it gets on. And if not, I can gift the garments that I make or resell them. So with Clothkits, it all comes together in one bundle. So I was really curious to see how it all comes. It's printed onto the fabric. It's very different to how I've made garments before. So this was a lady's who can't sew anymore, and her daughters wanted it to be used. So they gave me a really good deal. Some of it has been pre-cut, that the lady pre-cut in the 80s. Some of it hasn't been opened yet, so let's get stuck in. I've got the Clothkits trousers, and I think this one's open, so it has been pre-cut. And then got another bag of notions and little hooks in, and given the grey colour, I think this is probably for the pants here. So given that this was a 1980s vintage kit, I felt like the fabric would need a freshen up because it had been in storage for so long. Because the cord is a woven cotton, I didn't want it to completely disintegrate when I washed it. So I decided to overlock all of my pattern pieces before washing to give stability to the edges. So I overlocked all of my pieces, being careful not to remove too much from the edge, just to kind of trim and neaten them. And then I washed them on a 30-degree wash and line dried these because I didn't want to tumble dry. So here is the booklet for the 457 Clothkits adult trousers. I found it really fascinating looking through the instructions, how they'd advised people to make the trousers. So some of the instructions I completely followed, and I thought the illustrations within the instructions were really detailed. Other parts where it suggested clipping into the curved seam, I didn't do because I didn't think the cord would be very durable if I did this, and I had overlocked it already. The pockets were the opening for the trousers, and it suggested turning and stitching the edge of the pockets, which was like a woven pocket lining. So they were overlocked, so I didn't follow this. I found it really fascinating, some of the hand stitch techniques they had and the hand stitch buttonhole, and I was very, very grateful for the buttonhole function on my machine. So I used almost all of the parts that came in the kit. I loved the little Clothkits labels with the 2 birds on. I thought they were gorgeous. Came with 2 threads, a Clothkits label that actually had wash instructions on it, which I thought was really helpful. The only thing that I didn't use was the interfacing, because it had gone a little bit musty in storage. I thought it would just disintegrate in the wash. So I left the interfacing and used my own interfacing. But I did use all the hooks and bars and the thread, and they were still all in really good condition, and the buttons. I followed the instructions exactly for the pleats on the front of the trousers. The notches had already been cut out for me when the pattern pieces had been originally cut out. At this point, I was obsessed with the fabric. It was so soft and thick, and the back was like a brushed cotton. It's very rare you see cotton corduroy. This is a cotton and modal corduroy that is this high quality. I continued to work my way through the pattern and the instructions. The biggest change I would say that I made was I did a really scant seam allowance. It was more like a 6mm. So I was going just past where I'd overlocked to, rather than the recommended 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So on the front of the booklet, it said that for a 12 to 14, the hip measurements was 94 to 99 centimetres. That would be a UK size 10 in kind of modern day measurements, possibly a small 12. So I knew that was going to be too small for me. So I did a really scant seam allowance in the hope that they would still fit me. At this point in the project, I could have kissed the buttonhole function on my machine. When I looked at the instructions for hand stitching a buttonhole, I was so appreciative. The instructions advise to hand stitch the back of the waistband, so to stitch it right sides facing on the front and then to hand stitch it on the inside. To be honest, this is how I finish most of my waistbands because I think it does give a much higher finish. Sometimes I just hand stitch them in place, sometimes I hand stitch it to get it exactly where I want it and then go over the top and do a top stitch. In this instance, I hand stitched it together using a ladder stitch. So I did this on the front waistband and on the back waistband. The hand stitching on the waistband did take a bit of time, but I think it gives a much neater finish. Everything meets correctly as it should, and there's no bits of the lining or seam allowance poking out. The changes that I made to the seam allowance, taking it in, and I'd put the button a little bit further out to try and give me a little bit more room on the waist and hips, meant that there was less space on the waistbands to space out the button with the hook and eye. So they are slightly closer together than in the pattern instructions. So to put the hook and eye on, I normally do a stitch a couple of times and go on it, then attach the bar on to ensure it's really secure, because there's nothing worse than one of those bars popping off your trousers when you're sitting down at work or in a meeting or something. So go over it several times. I did 2, 3, maybe 4 times, get the really strong stitch underneath and then go over the top of the bar and the bottom of the bar several times and then do a few stitches behind to secure. To make sure that my hook and bar line up, I always use the button and buttonhole together to put the trousers how I want them when they're fastened and secured. Then, once everything's in place, I hook the hook through the bar and then sew it in place exactly where I want it to meet. And this stops the waistband getting distorted or going out of place, so you know that you're sewing it in exactly the right place. Once the hook and bar are both attached, just double check that it all lines up nicely. Here they are, all finished. I was really pleased with the outcome. I love the quality of the fabric. And it was nice to make a pair of trousers that didn't have a zip on or elasticated waist, because the opening and closure is just through that kind of bib front on the front of the trousers. I love the Clothkits labels on it, and I like the little details like the pleating on the front. Even with me doing such a scant seam allowance, unfortunately they are still really tight on my stomach and my hips. Hopefully I will be able to live with it, but if not, I'm still really glad I made them and I really enjoyed the process of making them. I didn't hem the bottom of the trousers. I am going to wash and wear them a couple of times before I commit to a certain length. The little details of the button and the hook and bars are really nice, and I love the Clothkits label that's got the washing instructions and the fabric composition. That's not something I've come across before. And I like the little details of the top stitching as well.